He smirked, pulling his new 20-something bride close, ready to humiliate the woman who spent a decade building his life. But his smug grin shattered when the host of the evening, a notoriously ruthless billionaire, stepped to the microphone and proudly announced, "Please welcome my beautiful wife, Alina." Alina Bradford, now Alina Sinclair, again stared at the divorce decree sitting on the mahogany desk of her lawyer's office. It was a single piece of paper that erased 10 years of sacrifice, late nights, and blind loyalty. Alina, a stunning, fiercely intelligent black woman with a mind for structural engineering and a heart that loved too generously, had spent her 20s molding Henry into the man he was today. When she met Henry, he was a struggling junior financial analyst, drowning in student debt and self-doubt. Alina had been his anchor. She paid the rent on their first cramped Brooklyn apartment, cooked his meals, and edited his resumes while simultaneously clawing her way up in the viciously competitive, male-dominated world of commercial architecture. She had built him up brick by brick, just as she did her skyscrapers. But as Henry's career finally stabilized and his bank account grew, his gratitude warped into resentment. He began to feel emasculated by Alina's success. When she was promoted to senior partner at her firm, making front-page news in Architectural Digest, Henry didn't celebrate. He picked a fight about how often she traveled. Then came Chloe. Chloe was a 24-year-old marketing assistant at Henry's new firm. She was blonde, impressionable, and completely enamored by Henry's mid-level corporate status. To Chloe, Henry was a titan of industry. To Henry, Chloe was the ego boost he desperately craved. Alina found out about the affair in the most cliché, humiliating way possible. A glowing notification on Henry's iPad left carelessly on the kitchen island. Can't wait for tonight. Missing you already." When Alina confronted him, the calm, dignified grace her mother had instilled in her shone through. She didn't scream or throw plates. She simply packed his bags. But Henry, backed into a corner, decided to go on the offensive. He looked at the woman who had given him everything and sneered. "You're just too hard, Alina," he had said, adjusting his designer tie she had bought him. "You're always working, always pushing. You forgot how to be a wife. Chloe actually needs me. She makes me feel like a man. The divorce was unnecessarily brutal." Henry fought for a piece of the assets Alina had single-handedly acquired, claiming his emotional support contributed to her promotions. Alina, exhausted and disgusted, handed over the deed to the Hamptons' house and a hefty cash settlement just to be rid of him. She wanted a clean break, a silent exit, and the peace to rebuild her life. She moved to Denver, reverting to her maiden name, Sinclair. She threw herself entirely into her work, determined to let the sting of Henry's betrayal fuel her ambition rather than break her spirit. It was during the bidding war for the new tech hub in downtown Denver that she met Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan wasn't just wealthy. He was generational, quiet money wealthy. As the founder and CEO of Hayes Global, a massive conglomerate spanning real estate and green technology, he was a billionaire who despised the spotlight. He didn't have a publicist, he rarely gave interviews, and he certainly didn't flaunt his wealth on social media. Alina didn't know who he was when she first met him. She had been standing in the rain at the construction site of the proposed tech hub, wearing a hard hat, a tailored trench coat, and muddy boots, aggressively arguing with a contractor over the tensile strength of the steel beams. Jonathan, dressed in a simple, unmarked black raincoat, had been observing her from the sidelines. When the contractor walked away, muttering under his breath, Jonathan approached her. "You're entirely right, you know," he had said, his voice a deep, calming rumble. "Using grade 50 steel on a cantilever that size is a structural disaster waiting to happen. Alina had looked him up and down, unimpressed. "And you are?" "Just a man who appreciates a woman who refuses to compromise on the foundation," Jonathan replied, extending a hand. "I'm Jonathan." The connection wasn't a sudden blinding flash of Hollywood romance. It was a slow, deliberate burn. Jonathan was captivated by Alina's brilliance, her uncompromising standards, and the quiet, regal dignity with which she carried herself. Alina, scarred by Henry's deep-seated insecurities, was guarded. But Jonathan was fundamentally different. He was completely secure in his own skin. He didn't just tolerate her success, he championed it. He loved her rich, dark skin, the natural crown of her hair, and a fiery intellect that intimidated lesser men. They kept their relationship entirely hidden from the public and the press. It was a sacred, private sanctuary for both of them. When Jonathan proposed a year later, it wasn't at a crowded restaurant or a flashy public event. It was in the quiet, sunlit kitchen of her Denver apartment, holding a custom-designed ring that cost more than a small island. They eloped in Geneva, Switzerland, accompanied only by a judge and 2 close friends. Alina Sinclair became Alina Hayes. She was happier, more powerful, and more at peace than she had ever been in her entire life. But she hadn't forgotten the past. She had just left it where it belonged, in the rearview mirror. 2 years after the divorce, the past decided to rear its ugly head. The Metropolitan Arts and Innovation Gala in New York City was the pinnacle of the social season. It was an invite-only affair where old money rubbed shoulders with new tech royalty. Tickets couldn't be bought. They had to be granted by the board of directors. Henry Bradford, having recently launched a boutique financial app that secured a moderate Series A funding round, felt he had finally arrived. He managed to leverage a connection through one of his investors to secure 2 tickets to the gala. For Henry, this was his crowning achievement. This was his moment to prove that leaving Alina was the best thing he had ever done. He walked through the gilded doors of the Crystal Atrium in Manhattan with Chloe on his arm. Chloe was practically vibrating with excitement. She was squeezed into a sequined, aggressively red designer gown that screamed new money, dripping in rented diamonds. She spent the first 20 minutes snapping selfies near the ice sculptures, desperately tagging the location on her social media to show her followers she was breathing the same air as billionaires. "Look at this place, babe," Henry whispered, puffing out his chest in his tailored tuxedo. "This is where we belong, the major leagues." "It's amazing, Ricky," Chloe cooed, kissing his cheek. "And to think you used to be stuck on the couch with her." Henry smirked. "Ancient history. Tonight is about networking. I need to get 5 minutes with Jonathan Hayes. If Hayes Global adopts my app for their internal corporate structure, we're talking a 9-figure buyout." Across the sprawling, chandelier-lit ballroom, Alina Hayes stood near a towering arrangement of white orchids. She looked breathtaking. She wore a custom-made midnight blue velvet gown that cascaded effortlessly down her figure. Her hair was styled in an elegant, intricate updo, and her only jewelry was a pair of subtle, vintage diamond drop earrings and the breathtaking, flawless diamond on her left hand. She was alone for a brief moment. Jonathan had been cornered by a persistent European energy minister near the VIP bar and had given Alina an apologetic, loving look before being dragged into a policy debate. Alina didn't mind. She was content sipping her sparkling water and observing the opulent chaos of the room. That was when Henry spotted her. He froze, his champagne flute hovering inches from his mouth. His eyes narrowed. Alina! What was she doing here? This was an elite event, light years above the pay grade of a commercial architect, even a successful one. He scanned the area around her. She was standing by herself. No date, no colleagues. A cruel, vindictive spark ignited in Henry's chest. He remembered how cold she had been during the divorce, how she had packed his bags without shedding a single tear, making him feel completely insignificant. Now here she was, standing alone in a room full of power couples, looking like a relic of his past. "See someone you know?" Chloe asked, following his gaze. Her face contorted into a tight fake smile as she recognized the woman from the old photographs. "Oh, is that—" "Yeah," Henry said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Come on, let's go say hello. It's only polite." Alina saw them coming from 50 feet away. She recognized the arrogant swagger in Henry's walk immediately. She took a slow, deep breath, her face smoothing into a mask of complete and utter indifference. "Well, well, well, Alina Sinclair," Henry announced loudly as he approached, deliberately using her maiden name. He stepped into her personal space, practically shoving Chloe forward. "I have to admit, I'm shocked to see you here. Did your firm win the contract to design the centerpieces?" Alina's dark eyes flicked over Henry, taking in his slightly too tight tuxedo, before settling on Chloe. "Henry," she said smoothly, her voice rich and completely devoid of emotion. "And you must be Chloe. I recognize you from the iPad." Chloe's face flushed a deep, ugly red, but she quickly recovered, clutching Henry's bicep possessively. "It's lovely to finally meet you in person, Alina. Ricky has told me so much about you, mostly about how stressed you always were. It's a shame you're here all by yourself tonight. Did you come with a friend?" "I'm managing just fine," Alina replied, her tone polite but icy enough to freeze over hell. "Enjoy your evening." She turned to walk away, completely uninterested in engaging in a petty high school drama. But Henry couldn't let it go. He reached out and grabbed her elbow. Alina stopped dead. She looked down at his hand gripping her velvet sleeve, and then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. The look she gave him was so lethal, so deeply intimidating, that Henry instinctively dropped his hand. "Don't run off so soon, Alina," Henry said, his voice rising a few decibels, catching the attention of a few nearby socialites. He wanted an audience. "We're just catching up. I just wanted to see how you were doing since you had to downsize your life. I know it's been hard for you to watch my app take off. We just secured a massive Series A. We're actually here to meet with Jonathan Hayes. You know, the billionaire, but I guess you wouldn't know anything about people at that level." Alina looked at him, truly looking at the man she had wasted her 20s on. He was small. He was petty, loud, and hopelessly insecure. "I'm very happy for your app, Henry," Alina said calmly, the corners of her mouth twitching with the faintest hint of a genuine, pitying smile. "But I highly doubt Jonathan Hayes is interested in a mid-market financial tracker." Henry scoffed loudly, drawing more eyes from the surrounding crowd. "Oh, really? Is that your expert business opinion? You're an architect, Alina. You draw buildings. You don't know the first thing about tech acquisition or what men like Jonathan Hayes want." Chloe chimed in, giggling and stroking her barely visible baby bump, a new development she clearly wanted to showcase. "It's okay, Ricky. She's probably just bitter. It must be so hard to see us so happy and successful, building a real family, while she's still alone." Alina stood perfectly still under the glittering chandelier. The crowd around them had gone quiet, watching the drama unfold. Henry stood tall, a smirk plastered on his face, waiting for Alina to snap, to yell, or to run away in tears. He wanted his victory, but Alina didn't blink. She just looked past Henry's shoulder, her eyes softening, a warm, radiant smile breaking across her face. "Actually," Alina said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet of the room, "I know exactly what Jonathan Hayes wants. Henry let out a loud, incredulous bark of laughter that echoed awkwardly against the marble columns of the crystal atrium. He looked around, hoping the surrounding guests would join in on his amusement, but the elite crowd merely stared back with polite, uncomfortable silence. "You," Henry sneered, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "You know what Jonathan Hayes wants? What are you pitching him a new glass awning for his corporate headquarters?" "Don't embarrass yourself, Alina. People like him don't care about the contractors who build their offices. They care about visionaries. They care about tech." Chloe giggled, emboldened by Henry's arrogance. "Maybe you should stick to your blueprints, sweetie. Ricky is playing in the major leagues now." Alina didn't flinch. Her dark, luminous skin seemed to glow under the warm light of the chandeliers, her posture radiating an untouchable, regal calm. She looked at Henry not with anger, but with the mild, clinical fascination of a scientist observing a particularly slow-witted insect. Before she could respond, the crowd behind Henry began to part. The low murmur of the room shifted, a subtle ripple of deference moving through the billionaires, socialites, and politicians. "Darling, I am so deeply sorry." A rich, authoritative voice resonated over Henry's shoulder. Henry froze. He recognized that voice from the dozen TED Talks and keynote speeches he had obsessively studied over the past 6 months. A man stepped seamlessly to Alina's side. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo that didn't need flashy lapels to scream its value. His silver-flecked hair was immaculately styled, and the rare vintage Patek Philippe watch on his wrist cost more than Henry's entire Series A funding round. It was Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan completely ignored Henry and Chloe. He slipped a strong, possessive arm around Alina's waist, pulling her flush against his side, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her temple. "The Swiss energy minister cornered me," Jonathan murmured to her, his tone intimately soft, yet loud enough for the paralyzed couple in front of them to hear. "I tried to escape 3 times, but you know how they're about the new thermal grid proposals. Are you all right? Have you been horribly bored?" Alina smiled, the icy mask she had worn for Henry melting into genuine, radiant warmth. She rested her hand effortlessly against Jonathan's chest. "Not at all, John. I was just catching up with an old acquaintance." Jonathan finally turned his gaze toward Henry. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the piercing, predatory intellect that had built a $70 billion empire. He looked at Henry, taking in the slightly ill-fitting tuxedo, the sweating brow, and the terrified, wide-eyed stare. "I see," Jonathan said smoothly, extending a hand that Henry took with a trembling, clammy grip. "Jonathan Hayes." "Ah, Henry," he stammered, his voice suddenly 2 octaves higher. "Henry Bradford. I'm the founder and CEO of Apex Financial. We actually submitted a partnership proposal to your acquisition team last." "Apex Financial," Jonathan interrupted, his tone pleasant but utterly final. He didn't let Henry finish the pitch. "Yes, the boutique ledger app." Henry's chest puffed out slightly, a glimmer of desperate hope returning to his eyes. "Yes, exactly. We just secured our Series A, and I truly believe that Hayes Global could, before Henry could dig his grave any deeper." The gentle chime of a crystal glass being tapped echoed through the ballroom. Arthur Kensington, the silver-haired chairman of the Metropolitan Arts Board, stood at the podium on the grand stage, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed gracefully across the room. "If I could have your attention, tonight we celebrate innovation, art, and the future of our great city. But before we begin the auction, I would like to invite our primary benefactor to the stage to say a few words. Please welcome a man who needs no introduction, and the stunning woman who thankfully keeps him in line. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan and Alina Hayes, The room erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Henry stopped breathing. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, pallid gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Beside him, Chloe swayed on her rented stilettos, her manicured hand flying to her mouth in absolute horror. "Alina Hayes," the words echoed in Henry's empty head. "Hayes." Jonathan smiled, giving Alina's waist a gentle squeeze. "Shall we, Mrs. Hayes?" "We shall," Alina replied, her voice smooth as silk. As she turned to walk toward the stage, she paused and looked back at Henry. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Henry, and good luck with the app." Henry and Chloe stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by humiliation as they watched Alina glide through the parted crowd, ascending the velvet stairs to the stage. She stood beside one of the most powerful men in the world, looking entirely at home, entirely adored, and entirely out of Henry's league. He watched as Jonathan took the microphone, but Henry couldn't hear the speech. The roaring in his ears was too loud. He had spent 2 years convincing himself that Alina was a bitter, aging workaholic who would die alone in a condo surrounded by blueprints. He had paraded his young, naive new wife around like a trophy, desperate to prove he had won the divorce. Instead, he had just insulted the wife of the billionaire he was begging for money. The applause faded, and the orchestra resumed playing a soft, classical hum. The gala flowed back into its rhythm of whispered deals and clinking champagne glasses. But Henry couldn't move. He dragged Chloe toward the back of the atrium, hovering near the exit doors, desperate to leave but entirely too panicked about his company's future to walk away. "Ricky, what are we going to do?" Chloe hissed, her voice trembling. "You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was just a struggling architect. She's married to Jonathan freaking Hayes." "Shut up, Chloe. Just shut up, let me think," Henry snapped, running a trembling hand through his hair. His mind raced. He had to fix this. If he could just apologize to Alina, if he could just grovel and explain that he was caught off guard, maybe he could salvage the acquisition deal. His entire company's valuation depended on the rumor that Hayes Global was looking to buy them out. 30 minutes later, he spotted them. Alina and Jonathan were standing near the terrace doors, away from the heaviest crowds, speaking quietly with the French ambassador. When the ambassador walked away, Henry took a deep breath, plastered on his most remorseful, charming smile, and practically marched over. "Alina, Jonathan, Mr. Hayes." Henry stumbled over his words as he approached, leaving Chloe trailing awkwardly behind him. I just wanted to come over and formally congratulate you both. I had no idea you two were married. Alina, you look incredible. Truly." Jonathan slowly turned to face Henry. The billionaire's expression was unreadable, a terrifying mask of polite corporate indifference. He held his champagne glass loosely, but the tension in his shoulders was predatory. "Bradford, isn't it?" Jonathan asked quietly. "Yes, sir." Henry swallowed hard. "Look, Alina, about earlier. I was just surprised. I didn't mean to come off as abrasive. We have so much history, and I just—" "Henry," Alina interrupted. Her voice wasn't angry. It was far worse. It was tired. "You don't need to perform. We're past that. I'm not performing." Henry lied desperately. "I genuinely want to apologize. And Mr. Hayes, since we're all here, I'd love to officially set up a meeting with your acquisition team regarding Apex Financial. I truly believe our infrastructure can revolutionize your internal ledgers." Jonathan looked down at his drink, swirling the golden liquid slowly, before looking back up at Henry. "Apex Financial," Jonathan repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Yes, the subsidiary venture under Vanguard Capital." Henry beamed, his heart leaping into his throat. "Exactly. Vanguard led our Series A. We're perfectly positioned for an enterprise buyout." I am aware of your position, Mr. Bradford, Jonathan said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal chill. I am also aware of Vanguard Capital's portfolio. In fact, Hayes Global owns a controlling 60% stake in Vanguard Capital. Henry's smile faltered. His eyes darted between Jonathan and Alina. I didn't know that. No, you wouldn't, Jonathan replied smoothly. We keep our holding companies highly compartmentalized. When Vanguard brought the Apex financial acquisition proposal to my desk 3 weeks ago, I was intrigued. The user interface was clean. The market placement was adequate. Henry's chest soared. He was going to be rich. Despite the embarrassment, he was going to get the buyout. Thank you, sir. I've worked incredibly hard on, however. Jonathan cut him off again, stepping slightly closer to Henry, the height difference suddenly glaringly obvious. I don't make unilateral decisions on tech acquisitions. I delegate all software infrastructure assessments to my lead technical advisor and the head of our innovation board. Jonathan turned to Alina, a look of profound, unwavering respect in his eyes. My wife, Jonathan stated simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The classical music playing across the room faded into white noise. Chloe let out a tiny, stifled gasp. Henry felt his knees go physically weak. Alina looked at her ex-husband. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. The beautiful, brilliant black woman who had paid his rent, ironed his shirts, and built his confidence when he was nothing, stared at him with absolute, unbreakable authority. I reviewed the Apex source code 2 weeks ago, Henry, Alina said, her voice perfectly level, carrying the clinical precision of an engineer. Before I even realized you were the CEO. The underlying architecture is heavily derivative. Your encryption protocols are outdated, and your scalable memory limits would collapse under the weight of a multinational conglomerate like Hayes Global. Henry was suffocating. Alina, please. We can patch the code. We can rewrite the encryption. It's just a funding issue. If you just give us the capital. It's not just a funding issue, Henry, Alina said softly, shaking her head. It's a foundational issue. You built a flashy exterior to hide a structurally weak core. You cut corners. You prioritized the appearance of success over the actual work. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water. I recommended that Hayes Global decline the acquisition. And as the majority shareholder of Vanguard Capital, I also recommended they pull their Series B funding round next quarter. The company is a liability. Henry's entire world cratered. Without Vanguard's Series B funding, Apex Financial would be bankrupt in 6 months. He had leased a penthouse. He had bought Chloe a wagon. He had leveraged his entire life on the promise of this buyout. You did this on purpose, Henry hissed, his voice shaking with sudden venomous rage, dropping the polite facade. You vindictive. Jonathan moved so fast it was barely a blur. He didn't raise his hands, but he stepped directly into Henry's personal space, his imposing frame blocking Alina entirely. The billionaire's eyes were cold, dead, and utterly terrifying. Choose your next word with extreme care, Bradford, Jonathan whispered, his voice dangerously low, because it will be the last word you ever speak in the city. Henry's mouth snapped shut. He looked at Jonathan, reading the absolute sincerity in the billionaire's threat. He looked at Chloe, who was crying, her mascara running down her flushed cheeks, suddenly realizing that her ticket to high society had just been cancelled. You wanted to know what I wanted, Henry, Jonathan said, his voice returning to a smooth, conversational volume, though the lethal edge remained. I want a partner who builds things that last. I want a woman whose intellect challenges me, whose grace inspires me, and whose strength matches my own. I found her, and every day I count my blessings that a man as blindingly foolish as you let her go. Jonathan stepped back, offering his arm to Alina. Now, Jonathan said, dismissing Henry as casually as one brushes lint from a jacket. "If you'll excuse us, we have a charity auction to win." Alina took Jonathan's arm. She didn't look back at Henry. She didn't need to. She had spent a decade looking back, trying to pull a man forward who only wanted to drag her down. Now she was looking strictly at the future as they walked away, disappearing into the glittering sea of New York's elite. Henry Bradford stood near the exit doors, listening to his new wife sob, holding a glass of cheap champagne, and realizing that he had just watched the best thing that ever happened to him walk away with the world. If you loved the incredible twists and sweet karma in Alina's journey, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, real-life relationship stories. What would you have done in Alina's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.